What's up, everybody? Mike Soul. This video is a response to a point that Tito Ortiz brought up in my last video entitled Tyson Reconsidered. And he's saying, how could I mention Mike Tyson amongst the greats as far as his prime of heavyweights of all time when he lost to a guy like Buster Douglas when he was 23 years old. And a lot of people say, well, how could he lose his bum? How could you compare him to all these other guys? And my thing is, there's a lot of different extenuating circumstances that you have to consider. One of the fighters that Mike Tyson is always invariably linked to is Muhammad Ali. And one of the factors why they're linked is because it's hard to decipher what exactly their primes were. With Muhammad Ali, he had his career interrupted by the suspensions and the possible prison sentence that the Supreme Court hadn't ruled in his favor. He was a very, very brave man for what he went through, but he lost roughly 3 years of his career, and it would have been his prime. At that time, he was undefeated. So he didn't fight from the time he was 25 years old until he was 28, I believe. But the thing about it, though, a lot of people, this is the thing, though. Technically, a 28-year-old fighter should still be in his prime. But with Ali, people say, well, the layoff hurt him, which it did. He put on weight. He got naturally bigger. He didn't quite have the same reflexes, although he still was extraordinarily fast. He wasn't quite as fast as he was before 3, 4, 5 years earlier, and he did not have the legs. The layoff really hurt his legs, but he went on to still be a great heavyweight amongst an era of great heavyweights. Mike Tyson had a similar amount of time out of the ring due to prison. I think this hurt Tyson more so than what Ali went through, because at least Ali was still able, if I'm not mistaken, correctly, he was still able to spar and do other things. Tyson really couldn't even do that in prison. Like I said, I might be incorrect on that, but if I'm not mistaken, Tyson's physical, even his body changed a little bit. I think even though he was still muscular, he kind of got a little soft physically. He wasn't quite as chiseled in his appearance. Don't get me wrong, he still was in shape, but his body sort of changed from a boxing physique standpoint. But anyway, we'll get back to the point of the video. How can you consider him being his prime when he lost to a guy like Buster Douglas, 23 years old? Well, there's so many different circumstances. Number one, I think there's this great myth out there that Buster Douglas was his bum. This absolute bum. That's bullshit. Buster Douglas is the epitome of an underachieving athlete. When he was focused, when he was in shape, he was a top, at least a top 10 heavyweight. Not all time, I'm talking about when he's fighting. When he was in shape, when he was focused, he was at least a top 10 contender. He beat some significant fighters. He beat Greg Page, if I'm not mistaken. He beat Mike Tyson, of course. He was beating Tony Tucker until he got KO'd. He was beating him pretty handily. So he has some wins. He also beat, oh yeah, Trevor Burbick, Oliver McCall, and and Tony Tucker was undefeated, I believe, at the time when he was beating, when Douglas was beating him. So Douglas was not this guy, this bum. Douglas had power. Douglas had a great, excellent jab. He could move. He was not a bum. He just, for whatever reasons, he never was exactly motivated. That's one of the reasons why a guy like him, his weight fluctuated. What the hell, he blew up to over 400 pounds one time. Later on, I mean, the guy had some serious issues going on. The one thing that people forgot or don't bring up is what happened to Douglas just before the fight. And I think it was the deciding factor as to why he performed the way he did. Is a lot of times people forget, a lot of times it's not about skill, it's about your will. It's about imposing yourself. It's about, saying, look, I'm here, I'm not gonna back down from you. And a lot of guys that works, like against Sonny Liston, Ali and whatnot. People forget that this guy's mother died just before the fight. Just before the fight. And I believe, there were some people say, look, man, if you don't want to delay this fight, man, to get over the grief, get over the period of time, you don't understand. He wanted to fight. And I remember hearing about that when I was younger, and I'm like, okay, well, that's no excuse. But I've been through that. I've been through the death of my mother. And I sometimes even look at my life before my mother died and after my mother died. I've never been the same person. I remember reflecting on my own life when I was 25 years old. My mother died in a somewhat tragic manner. And I remember thinking to myself, I haven't achieved certain things that I should have in my own mind. And I used her as inspiration to go on and do things that I hadn't done. And, I can relate to that. So this guy went through the death of his mother just before this fight. You think he's scared of Mike Tyson? He wasn't scared of any fucking man stepping in the ring. If he was before, he wasn't then. That played a factor. Alright? Now with Tyson himself, I don't know about him not training per se, because he looked good in the ring. He didn't look like he was overweight like he sometimes did later on in his career. Because Mike's even in that stage of his career, Mike always came into a fight in great shape. I think the problem was, as a matter of fact, some people even think that Tyson overtrained at the end at that bout, coming into that bout. I think the problem was that he just was not mentally focused anymore. He wasn't taking his opponent seriously like he used to. He started believing his own press clippings. He probably thought of himself as a semi-god. I remember Tyson saying before, not too long ago, that one of his problems was that he grew to become very narcissistic, thinking that he could just walk in there and guys are just going to drop. And he became supremely overconfident. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that people that were surrounded by him. He didn't have those positive influences. He didn't have those people who were interested in Tyson becoming an all-time great heavyweight and pushing the positive, pushing him to do the positive activities, which would have led to him probably even beating and inspired Buster Douglas. Guys like Cus D'Amato, who died, Bill Caton, Jimmy Jacobs, who had passed away, Steve Lott, Kevin Rooney. All these people were removed, and he was surrounded by people who only were interested in being lackeys and his money and feeding his ego and telling him, yeah, Mike, you're the best. Yeah, Mike, you're the greatest. Yeah, Mike, can I get think I can get $1,000 for such and such. Yeah, Mike, you're the best. Yeah, hey Mike, I can borrow 5,000. You think I can? That's all the people he was surrounded by. And even with Buster Douglas, after you can kind of even say that Buster Douglas had his Tyson Spinks moment when he beat Tyson, just on a more accelerated manner, because after he beat Mike Tyson, he reverted back to his old habits, not training, probably tied up in litigation, I think because Don King and them was trying to reverse the decision, and I think they were trying to force a rematch with Douglas, which he didn't want, and a lot of people don't bring that up. And when he fought Holyfield, he was out of shape. He probably had no business being in the ring that night, and he wasn't inspired. He just pretty much just wanted to pay her. It's one of those situations that it's hard to explain. It's inexplicable, why Douglas never really showed up sometimes. Sometimes Douglas looked like a great heavyweight, and just sometimes he looked like a bum. So, and I remember when he came out of retirement later on, and he actually wasn't that bad. He was a pretty good fighter. Was he a heavyweight contender, a champion at that point? No, he was older, but he wasn't a bad fighter. So it's not like Tyson lost to just bum. It's not like he lost to E Honda or some shit like that. Not E Honda, but the character off of I forgot his name. But it's not like he lost to Glass Joe. I remember him. He lost to a guy who was a heavyweight with excellent skills and attributes, and he was pumped up for this fight. Tyson wasn't. There have been other fighters who have lost to people, or could have lost to people, that would have been kind of embarrassing. Joe Louis almost lost to Billy Conn, a guy who he outweighed by almost 30 pounds, a guy who was in a completely different weight class. He was outclassing Joe Louis for the first 12 rounds of that fight.
There goes Clay on the floor. He's got to take the mandatory edge count.
You're not worried about this guy Cooper. How about when you get through with him? What are your plans after that?
Well, you're right. I'm not even worried about this big bum. Cooper will only be a warm-up until I get to that big ugly bear, Sonny Liston.
He's just threatening, and he's teasing Cooper.
He was doing a bit of showboating. He was dropping his hands. So I showed him one left, I showed him another left, and then when he couldn't get back any further, pop, I hit him with the left hook. And when I used to hit him with the left hook, the eyes used to shoot up the top of their head, and both his eyes were at the top of his head.